Mark Hilliard, and I am a master here on the Arcanum. And this evening we're doing a Hangout on the air for Thom, who has just completed his Level 6 Masters Challenges. And I set them up so they're kind of convoluted and nasty, and I want them to throw everybody for a loop and make everybody think. So tell me, Thom, what were your experiences going through these various challenges for this level?
Well, I had kind of mixed feelings, I guess. I had a lot of fun with the crop me, fix me, and have fun with it. I had a lot of fun with those, but with them not being my images, I guess there was a point where I felt like I'm putting a lot of work into this, but I don't get to keep it. You know what I mean? So at some point I was like, well, I really want to do a lot more to this, but it's kind of going to end up in the trash bin. So I had to kind of pick a stopping point. I think the have fun one was probably my favorite. I think it really gave me an opportunity to be creative. I like that a lot. The crop me one, I felt like it was difficult to get a good crop out of it. So it turned out to be more challenging than I thought it would be. I thought it would just be a quick deal. I'm usually pretty quick on my crops, but it really made me think about things. And what was the other one?
Thom?
Yep.
I think you're holding your finger over the microphone of the telephone.
Is that better?
Oh, that's much better. I'm going to have to talk to your wife about giving you basic technical instruction on that high-tech device.
Oh, boy. Well, did you catch any of that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
Well, you know, on this type of level, and every once in a while we're going to have levels like this. You're going to do this in Sphere 1 as well. You're not going to get to choose the work. The work's going to be thrown at you, and you have to learn to think, and me was designed to do that and make you uncomfortable when you realize that the images weren't that high quality. In fact, the Fix Me was taken by a 6-year-old boy. Okay? So there were definitely challenges there. I'm not going to talk to you about where I wanted you to go with them at this point, but rather I want to talk about some specific aspects of individual challenges, if you're up to it.
Sure.
Most importantly, the single largest, most important point for this whole process was the HDR and the dynamic range. And getting a handle and understanding dynamic range, more so as a photographer, so that as you study a scene, you know what it is you have to do to make your camera capture that scene to the best of your ability. And it wasn't about using the HDR software and how to make HDR images. Even though we had you doing that, the sole point of that aspect was to make you see failures in HDR, and at times when we shoot HDR images when we really don't need to. And by doing so, we can actually have images that are lower quality than the single image taken with the camera. So let's talk about that for a minute. Let's talk about the 2 HDR images that I gave you and asked you to process. What did you come away from that with? as far as the quality of the final image that you came up with?
I feel like the standalone image was better quality.
And that was the determination you were supposed to make.
Good.
The camera that those images were taken on, even the Fix Me, was a Leica M240 that has a dynamic range of 13.7, I believe, or 13.17. That might be what it is at ISO 200. And that was taken at ISO 200. And I knew when I took the image, shoot, I knew when I was holding the camera looking at the scene that I didn't need to do HDR because you can take these, you can set the camera into a spot meter mode, and you can use that meter, even though the spot meter really isn't a 1 degree meter, it's more like a 3 to 5 degrees. If you point that center spot of your camera viewfinder to the brightest part of the sky and take a meter reading there and get the exposure, what it tells you to expose that sky for, okay, and write it down or remember it. And then you take that meter and you point it at the darkest spot in the picture and you take that meter reading and write it down, and then just do some real easy math in your head and do a subtraction and find out how many stops it is. All right, you will know whether or not, if it's within the capability of your camera to capture successfully as a single shot. And you will get so good at this very, very fast. It doesn't take much practice to get to this point, that you'll be able to do this instantly. You won't even have to think about it. You point the camera over here and look at the meter, and then you point it over here and look at the meter. And you realize, oh yeah, you know, that's well within the dynamic range of this camera. Let's use that mode. If it's a little outside of the dynamic range of the camera, 1 or 2 stops, still take the single picture. All right. But then take that single image and feed it into your HDR software as a single image HDR. And the software will take that image and it will process it 3 ways: a stop under, stop as recorded, and a stopover. And then it'll take those 3 images and build an HDR. And it's always best to use photorealistic unless you're trying to do something really artsy-fartsy. Most people have a tendency to overcook their HDRs to the point that they're gaudy or grungy. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And that's fine if you're making an artistic statement. But most of the time, as landscape and nature photographers, it's our aim to get the prettiest, best representation as the images we saw. So we don't typically go for the grunge. So you have to be real careful with your processing. Select a recipe that's photorealistic. Play with the sliders. Don't overcook it, okay? And see what you come up with.
So with spot metering, then, does it? How do I factor in? I've never used a spot meter, so how do I factor in how many stops it is from black to white? Is there a numbering on it, or?
Set your camera to aperture priority mode. Mm-hmm. Set it on f8. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then you need to set the metering system. Your metering system will have what camera are you shooting with?
Canon 7D.
Okay, it'll have 3 metering modes. It'll have matrix, which it takes meter readings all over the entire picture, and it'll have center weighted, where it'll divide. Look at this screen as though it were your viewfinder. It will divide the screen into 2 parts. A about a 30% circle in the center versus the rest of the space around it. And what it does, usually, it assigns 75% of the decision making on that 30% in the center. And then it'll assign 30% of the decision making on the 70% around it and make an educated guess of where to meter. And it's not a bad way to go. And then the third metering mode is called spot metering. And you can assign spot metering to be on any of your focus points, center or around it, or, you know, it depends on how many focus points you have on your camera. I typically leave mine set to the dead center, okay? And it's that focus point then becomes your meter point. Now the meter point's bigger than what you see in the focus point. A true spot meter is going to give you a 1 degree spot, which is a little tiny circle in the center of your screen. The digital cameras are really going to be around 3%, so they're going to be a little bit bigger, but that's okay. So you've got spot meter selected, you've locked it to the center spot, the center point of your focusing array. You're an aperture priority at f8. Now you point that center at the brightest part of the sky, push the shutter button halfway down, and read the shutter speed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And remember that shutter speed. And now you point it to the darkest part of the scene, press the shutter button halfway down, and read the shutter speed. Make sure that your ISO is not in auto. Your ISO has to be locked on a specific ISO. Auto ISO is really bad for us, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now you just simply take those 2 meter readings and subtract one from the other, and that'll give you the number, as long as you understand how the shutter speed works. So 1/100th of a second to 1/200th of a second is 1 stop.
Okay.
1/200th of a second to 1/400th of a second is at 1 stop. 1/400th to 1/800th is 1 stop. So as we double it or we divide it by 2, we change it by 1 stop. And you just pick one end or the other and start counting towards the other one, either doubling it or cutting it in half, and measure how many times you do it. That tells you the number of stops or your dynamic range that you're measuring. It's that simple.
Well, great. I had no
Okay.
idea.
And that gives you the ability to measure exactly the dynamic range of the scene that you're trying to photograph. Now, it's a lot easier if you have a handheld meter. Okay. They make 1 degree spot meters. Seaconic makes one called a DR758. It costs about $800, but there are other ones that are less expensive. And you take a reading of the brightest part of the sky, and then you press memory, and then you take a meter reading of the darkest spot, and you press memory, and then there will be another button you press that'll press average, and it'll tell you dead center and how many stops apart they are. It'll tell you the dynamic range automatically. You don't even have to do the math in your head.
Mm.
Okay, so this is an easy way with the tools that you have to determine the dynamic range. Sometimes that can be hard, but with more experience it'll become second nature to you.
Okay.
And these are the skills that are important to master. This is just one of several. There's not a lot that you have to do to master the physics of exposure control. Aperture, shutter speed, ISO. Okay? You master those 3 things, and how to do the math in your head to convert from one to another, to convert from stop to stop. You're going to be a giant as a photographer, because he who masters the camera as a tool can then concentrate on the art rather than the technical side.
Mm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that helps. But you do seem to have gotten it. The sole point of the dynamic range, the HDR section, was to teach you when you need to do HDR and when you don't want to do HDR.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And on the two sample images I gave you, you don't need to do HDR for this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? The single shot worked much better and gave a much more pleasing image. But then there are at times other considerations. Maybe it's an artsy fartsy type of thing that you're trying to create, where you're looking at grunge. Okay, and that's fine. But as long as you know what you're doing and how to get there, you're going to be a better photographer. Okay, did that make sense to you?
It did, yeah. It made a lot of sense.
Okay.
When you asked whether you need third increment or half increment in bracketing, is that can you explain that a little bit? I didn't pick up on that.
Well, the camera has a bracketing mode where you can set it for 3, 5, 7, 9 shots depending on your camera. Most cameras are 3. And what you do is you turn bracketing on, you release the shutter button, put it on a tripod, or it isn't going to do you a bit of good. All right?
Sure.
It'll take 3 pictures. It'll take 1 picture as exposed. It'll take 1 picture underexposed and 1 picture overexposed. And the amount that it takes it over and underexposed is whether you choose 1/3 or 0.7 or 1 stop or 2 stops or 3 stops, depending upon your camera. So that's what that means. How far out of the exposure range do you want to go?
Okay.
Okay, I typically, if I'm going to do HDRs using my Leica, I typically will do it at half stops. And if it's not too wide of a dynamic range of a scene, I'll do 3 images. But I can do 5 or 7 images too and take it much further. Now, if I'm shooting with my Fuji, I've had all of the Fuji X cameras. They're wonderful cameras. And I've kept one in color, and that's my Fuji X-T1. And it is a nice camera. It uses all of my Leica glass. And when I'm taking HDRs with that, I might go 1 stop or 1.5 stops. Okay? To give myself a little bit more latitude within the HDR software. Now, a lot of people here are so dissatisfied with the HDR software because they say that it gives them too much grunge. And you can do it by hand. And one of our cohort members, Chris, is going to put together a tutorial video on doing it by hand. But rather than going to all of that expense in time to master that, it's better if you pick one piece of HDR software and master that and learn how to use it to create an HDR image without the grunge that's very, very photorealistic. Okay? And there are lots of them. You're using Photoshop or Lightroom, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Photoshop and Lightroom have a very powerful HDR package built right into them. Okay, I believe it's called to Convert to HDR Pro, and it works very, very well. And there's some wonderful tutorials and library for doing that. In fact, a very good one was picked as one of the videos by one of our cohort members in the past, and it will be on the page somewhere, that talks about how to do it really easy and very powerfully in Lightroom. Okay? There's the Nik HDR, and then there's Photomatics.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to have all 3, and sometimes one will give you more options than the other depending on what you want to do, but you really need to concentrate on mastering one before you expand out and exploring the others. Because if you're trying to learn all 3, you'll never really get to the point that you master any one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so then there was the crop me, and we talked about that, and you did a good job on that. That was just a basic, simple challenge. I mean, that was no big deal. Cropping for a pleasant composition, making sure that you swept the edges of your scene so that there was nothing distracting, that you gave your main subject enough room to breathe inside the scene. Okay, you did a very good job on that. The play with me, the Alice. Okay, I have a feeling that most people struggle more with that than anything else, because as part of the challenge, I have you research the history of Alice Flegg, so that will flavor what you do with the image, and that's important. When you're trying to create a piece of art, you're supposed to master it in all ways, and that's also including the knowledge and the background of what it is that you're capturing. Okay, without knowing who Alice Flegg was and what happened to her, you can't really make it a good guess on which way to go with your processing on that. And everybody's done stunning jobs with that, and everybody's been different, which just boggles my mind. There's been so many different approaches to that, and they've all been magnificent. Okay, and you did quite well. I get lots of moaning from the apprentices in the cohort about the Fix Me image and about the Alice Flegg image. Okay, everybody says, "Oh, I have to work too much on these, and they're not mine, and I don't get to use them." You know, my response to that is, "Quit whining and be an adult." You know, this is a test. Take the test and deal with it.
Yeah.
Okay, and to date, there's only been one person who hasn't complained. Okay, and that was Elon. And he was like a little a 6-year-old school kid who was so excited over what it was and what he had done with it. He could not wait to share it with everybody. But I understand where you're coming from. I understand where everybody else is coming from because, well, the Fix Me image specifically, I gave you a crap image. I gave you an image that was taken by my 6-year-old grandson. Okay? I handed him the camera, didn't know anything about it. I said, "Take me a pretty picture of that road going down by those trees." And he hit the camera up and went click, and he says, "Okay, Poppy, it's all done." And that's what you got. The Alice Flegg was that same day. He begged me to go see Alice Flegg's grave because he wanted to talk to her and talk to her evil brother who actually caused her to die, who was buried about 30 feet away. There's a saying, you know, if you walk around the grave so many times one way and so many times the other way, and then stop in just the right spot and put a ring on her grave, that you can talk to her and she'll listen. And boy, he did that. And then we had to come back that night and do it again. Okay, so he was really into this. And that wasn't a bad image, but it was a snapshot. That's what it was. It was a snapshot that someone would take on vacation, walking through a graveyard. Oh, cool. Click. But it was in focus, and it had color, and it had texture, and there was a certain character for it, to it. So that was a good image to play with. And you've all done really, really good work on that. So having said all of that, and having spent some time talking about dynamic range and the HDR software and explaining to you how to use the metering system in your camera to determine the dynamic range of the scene, can you tell me what it was, the biggest thing that you took from this challenge as a learning point?
Well, I actually took quite a bit. You know, I didn't really understand the histogram before, and I learned, well, everything I know about the histogram I learned through this challenge. You know, I guess I had heard that you want it lumped in the middle and not going up the sides, but I didn't really understand what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
And I can tell I can tell what my camera's capabilities are now, a lot better. And um, you know, when you would need to do an HDR and when you wouldn't. I've seen some HDR in the past and wanted to go recreate it, so I went out and looking back at it now, I took probably, you know, 7 or 9 shots that were all within my camera's dynamic range. So it really wasn't capturing anything more than what I captured in my average.
Yeah, but as long as you realize that that's okay, see, that in itself is a learning point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, and then the other challenge was the reflection shot. Reflection shots can be difficult and full of highlights. And to date, everybody's done really, really good on those too. And those still are dealing with the dynamic range of the image. Reflection shots in the bright sunlight, if anything's going to blow your dynamic range out, it's going to be that. Okay. So, anyways, I am satisfied that you walked away from this with the base level of knowledge that I wanted you to. You did a good job on all of your images. And like I said, I'm satisfied with the effort you put into it. I wanted this to be a harder level. I wanted to force you into an introspective mode where you looked at the images and you thought deeply about them. Now, I will tell you, from here on out, now that you've done level 6, everything becomes much harder. I expect more from you post-processing. I expect more from you behind the camera and mastering the camera as a tool. But the most important thing for the next 4 or 5 levels is I want to delve into what drove you to take a picture and what made you decide how you set the camera up and how you set up the composition. So we are going to dive into that really, really big. Okay? Don't worry, it's nothing that you can't do. As Pam once told me, it's really hard to think like that. Even Rhonda complains. You know, I don't want to have to get all touchy-feely with myself on why I did this. But we're going to explore the reasons behind why we do something behind the camera.
Okay.
Okay, because by knowing that, then we can further improve our work.
Sure.
Do you have any questions about level 6 or where we're going past this now?
I don't think I have any questions for level 6 anymore.
Okay. Well, with that, I'm going to stop this broadcast. We are going to save this on YouTube. And this one, level 6 broadcast, we are going to make mandatory viewing. Yours was a very good one. We're going to make it mandatory viewing for all future level 6 participants. I thank everybody for coming and being here with you and their support of you. And let me stop the broadcast if everybody will hang on for a few minutes.